It usually doesn't happen in a dramatic moment. More often, it happens when you're doing something small, something that doesn't feel important enough to remember. Maybe you're sitting at your desk at night, the room quieter than it used to be, the light from the screen still on, but your hands no longer moving. The page in front of you hasn't changed for a while, and without trying to think about anything specific, your mind drifts somewhere familiar. Not to something new, not to something urgent, but to something you once believed would happen. A plan that used to feel so certain it didn't even need to be questioned. You don't remember when you first made it. It wasn't something you analyzed carefully. It was just there, quietly shaping how you imagined your life would move forward. Maybe it was where you thought you would end up, or the kind of work you believed you would be doing by now, or simply the version of yourself you assumed you would become. At the time, it didn't feel like a plan. It felt like a direction, something stable, something already decided in a way that didn't require doubt. But sitting there now, in the quiet of an ordinary evening, something feels slightly different. You don't feel disappointment in a sharp or obvious way. It's more like noticing that something is no longer there. Like reaching for a thought you used to have and realizing it doesn't come back the same way anymore. The plan is still recognizable. You could still describe it if you tried, but it doesn't feel close. It doesn't feel like something you're moving toward anymore. And what's strange is that there wasn't a clear moment when you let it go. No final decision, no point where you told yourself this isn't going to happen. It just slowly stopped being part of how you see your life, without any announcement, without any clear ending. And now when you notice it, it feels less like losing something and more like realizing it has already been gone for a while. You sit there for a moment longer, not trying to replace it, because there isn't something new ready to take its place. There's just a quiet space where something used to be certain, and for the first time, you don't rush to fill it. The next day doesn't feel any different on the surface. You wake up around the same time, moving through the same quiet sequence of routines, the familiar weight of getting out of bed, the pause before starting, the small habitual actions that no longer require thought. Nothing in your schedule suggests that anything has changed. You still go to work, still respond to messages, still move through the same spaces and hear the same conversations, repeating in slightly different forms. And yet, something underneath all of that feels slightly misaligned. Not in a way that stops you from functioning, not in a way anyone else would notice, just enough that every now and then you become aware of it. It might happen while you're sitting at your desk, doing something you've done countless times before. There's no difficulty. Your hands move almost automatically. But somewhere in the background, there's a quiet thought that doesn't fully form, a sense that this doesn't connect to anything beyond itself anymore, that it doesn't lead where you once thought things would go. And the strange part is, you're not resisting it. You're not frustrated or trying to escape. You just notice. Later, during a break, you look at your phone without really searching for anything, scroll briefly, stop, and lock the screen again. There used to be a time when moments like this felt like pauses between something more important. Now they feel like part of the day itself, not empty, just unassigned. In the evening, when you return home, everything is where it should be. The room hasn't changed, the objects remain quietly in place. You set your things down, maybe prepare something simple to eat, maybe not. There isn't a strong feeling attached to any of it, just a steady continuation. At some point, you sit down, not because you're tired in an obvious way, but because nothing in particular is pulling you elsewhere. And this is where it becomes more noticeable, not as a problem, not as something to fix, but as a shift in how the day feels connected. There used to be a sense, even faint, that what you were doing was part of something that extended forward, that each day was moving toward a future you had already imagined. Now that feeling isn't as clear. The actions are still there, the effort is still there, but the thread tying everything together feels thinner, harder to trace. And instead of reacting to it, instead of redefining it immediately, you sit with it a little longer than you used to, as if acknowledging it is enough for now. It doesn't come as a single thought, and there isn't a clear sentence that explains everything. It's more like something slowly arranging itself in the background until one moment it becomes difficult to ignore, not because it's loud, but because it has been quietly present for longer than you realized. You begin to notice that the plan you once held onto wasn't something you actively chose every day. It didn't require maintenance or questioning. It simply existed as a silent structure behind your decisions. A reference point you didn't have to look at directly because it was always there, and maybe that's why you didn't notice when it started to fade, because nothing in your daily life required you to check whether it was still guiding you. You just kept moving, one day into the next, assuming the direction remained the same even when you stopped thinking about it, until now. Now when you try to reconnect with it, it feels distant. Not wrong, not impossible, just no longer aligned with where you are. And that realization doesn't feel sharp or disruptive. It settles quietly, like something you've known for a while, but haven't fully acknowledged. You start to see that letting go didn't happen in a single moment. It wasn't a conscious decision. It unfolded gradually through small adjustments you didn't think much about at the time. Choices that seemed temporary, detours that felt short-term, days where you told yourself you would return to it later. But later kept moving, and without realizing it, you moved with it. Not dramatically, not in a way that felt like giving something up, just gradually shifting until the distance between where you are and where you thought you would be became something you could feel. Not as regret, but as a quiet recognition. You begin to understand that the certainty you once had wasn't about knowing the future. It was about believing in a version of it strongly enough that you didn't question it. And now, without that belief holding everything in place, things feel more open, but also less defined. There's no clear path replacing the one that faded, no immediate sense of what comes next, just a space where something used to be certain. Sitting with that space feels unfamiliar, not uncomfortable in a painful way, but unfamiliar in the way silence feels when you're used to background noise. You realize that what you're experiencing isn't the loss of the plan itself, but the absence of the feeling that came with it, that quiet confidence, that sense of direction that didn't need to be explained. And without it, the days feel slightly different, not heavier, just less anchored. After a while, you begin to notice something unexpected. The absence of that plan doesn't feel as empty as you thought it would. At first, it seemed like something was missing, like a structure had been removed, leaving everything unsettled. But as the days continue, that feeling softens, not into clarity, not into a new direction, but into something quieter. You begin to see that the certainty you once carried wasn't entirely light. It gave you direction, but it also narrowed how you looked at things. There were choices you didn't consider, not because they weren't possible, but because they didn't fit the path you had already decided on. There were moments you moved through quickly because your attention was always slightly ahead of where you were. Even rest felt temporary, like a pause before continuing. Now, without that forward pull, time feels different. Slower in some moments, more open in others. You notice things you didn't use to notice, not in a dramatic way. Just small details that were always there but didn't feel important before. The way light shifts in the evening, the quiet rhythm of sounds in an empty room, the way your thoughts move when they're not directed toward a goal. It's not that these things suddenly become meaningful, it's that they're no longer overlooked. And in that shift, something else becomes clearer. Not everything needs to lead somewhere. Not every day has to connect to a larger plan. Some moments exist without needing to contribute to anything beyond themselves. Sitting with that idea feels unfamiliar at first, because for a long time even your quiet moments were part of something else, part of becoming, part of preparing. Now those same moments feel more self-contained, less like steps, more like pauses that don't need to end quickly. You begin to understand that letting go didn't take something away as much as it changed how you hold things. Before, you held on to the future tightly. Now, without that grip, things feel less fixed, but also less pressured. There's no quiet urgency telling you where you should be heading, no silent comparison between where you are and where you expected to be. Just the present moment unfolding, without needing to match anything. And in that space, a different kind of awareness forms, not about what comes next, but about recognizing that certainty itself was never permanent. Later that night, nothing feels particularly different on the surface. The room is the same, the quiet unchanged, the day ending the way it usually does without anything marking it as significant. You move through the last small routines almost automatically, turning off lights, putting things back, letting the space settle. And at some point, you pause again, not for any specific reason, just a moment where everything slows enough for you to notice where you are. There's no clear thought waiting this time, no realization forming, only a quiet awareness that doesn't need to become anything more. You're still here in a life that doesn't look exactly the way you once imagined, in a moment that isn't leading clearly towards something defined, and yet it doesn't feel unfinished in the way you expected. It just feels present. You think about that plan again, briefly, not to revisit it, not to measure distance, just to recognize that it was once part of you. Something that made sense, something that helped you move through certain parts of your life. And now, without it, nothing collapses, nothing stops. Things continue in ways that don't require that same certainty. And there's something quiet about that. Not relief, not sadness, just a gentle understanding that not everything needs to stay. Some things belong to a specific time, a specific version of you. And when that version changes, those things don't always follow. You don't replace them immediately. You don't force something new into that space. You just let the space exist for a while. And maybe that's what this moment is. Not an ending, not a beginning, just a point where something has already shifted, and you're finally noticing it. Outside, the world continues, as it always does. Inside, everything remains still. You don't try to define what comes next. You just sit there a little longer, letting the quiet settle around you. And for now, that feels enough.